Hi everyone and welcome to Form Building 101, the art of form building and exploring new iForm element input types. My name is MJ. I'll be fielding questions as they come in as we're going throughout the webinar here today, and Berit will be your presenter.
All right, thank you so much, MJ, and thank you everyone else who's joining us on today's webinar call. My name is Berit Johannesson, and I've been with Zerion Software for over 2 years here. And I love what I do. I love iFormBuilder, and I especially love working and training with individuals like yourself. A lot of what I focus on is just making sure that people and projects are successful, and my focus with that, if you can imagine, is with the training aspect. So today's session, we're just going to start and I'll go through just what different support options you have within iFormBuilder and when you are building your forms. The other thing we're going to go through is the best practices for form building. We're going to go into the form building golden rules and building a form. All right, so like I said, the first thing that we're going to cover today is the different support options. Not only what they are, but also some tips within them. The first thing that we have here is our Customer Success Center. And again, this is just a link that you can click to from the PDF that we are going to share. But what you'll notice here is our iFormBuilder.zendesk.com. We have 3 different sections: the Getting Started, the Help Desk, and the Community. If you have created an account within the iFormBuilder.zendesk, then that is wonderful because that gives you the ability to communicate within this community, but also to follow certain articles so that you can always see when they've been updated. We have our search section. So you can start typing in your questions there. But what I really love is that we have this chat section at the bottom. And this is so valuable when you're working on your project because we do have live agents. We have a couple here in the US, but also some in Hong Kong. So it's almost like our iFormBuilder community never sleeps, and our chat agent is there to help you whenever you need it. Besides the support that we have over there, we have our live webinars. And this is exactly what you're attending right now. We have multiple webinars that we have recorded, and those can be found in, if you go to iFormBuilder.com and you go under the Learn More section, you'll see webinars. You'll see 3 different categories once on this page. You'll see upcoming webinars, special topic recordings, and training recordings. So if you go to the upcoming webinars, you'll be able to sign up for any of the webinars that we have coming up in the future. Unfortunately, we haven't put our 2016 schedule up yet, so we are getting to a less amount of webinars available, of course. But please be sure to check that out and see if there's any of those that interest you. For our special topic recordings, these are our unique type of webinars. So today we're having a training recording webinar, and that can be found in that other recording section. But these are the ones that are always unique, and you can just click on them and watch those recorded sessions. The other piece that we have within our iFormBuilder support, and something that I want to make sure that you are aware of and you actually participate in by following, is our release notes. So underneath our note that we have here, we also have our release note section. By clicking on that section, you'll see a list of our past release notes. But you'll also see a section or a button that says follow, or in my case, unfollow. And this is because I've logged into Zendesk that I see that button. If you haven't logged in, you will not see that. But what's so important is if you decide to follow this, this chain and the release notes, then every time a new release is done, you'll receive an email making you aware of what that new release is, whether it's fixing bugs, or whether it is just letting you know about in either a client, iForm client update, or server update. Also on our support, we have our community forum. So this is, again, where you'll need to log in to be able to participate. But once you go into the community section, you'll see a little less options here, but you'll go, one of the most valuable one is the vote for features topic. Now in this vote for features, you're able to actually read what other iForm users are looking for within the iFormBuilder platform and what requests we have. The ideas that get the most traction and the most votes are actually then put into the iFormBuilder platform. So if there's something that you're looking for and it's not in iFormBuilder yet, but you really see the value in it and you think other people will see the value in it, then please go into the vote for features, place that idea here, and tell everybody you know to come in and vote for that specific feature. iFormBuilder also offers project services as well as different training sessions if that is something you're interested in. For the project services, we can help you build your forms, help build your integrations or implementations as well. For the iFormBuilder training, we're happy to go on site or do remote training if needed and help your team get up to speed with the platform. All right, so let's get started with our form builder. So the first thing I want us to go through here is the best practices. Now, some of these, if you are a user, an iFormBuilder user, you may be aware of some of these best practices, but others might not be as obvious to you. So we're going to go through each one of these. The first one, and this is so simple, but when you're looking at our help desk article and when you're talking to an iFormBuilder agent, or even today on this webinar, you may hear me say widget, input type, input element, element input type. I may combine all of them together. But it's just important to note that when we say that, we are referring to the same thing, which is a field that you've added to your form. The next best practice is when you're building a form, it's so helpful to have a set naming convention. And not only is this helpful for keeping your form builder homepage organized, but it's also helpful for you to be able to recognize when you do add a subform to a parent form, you're able to recognize that relationship. And if I just pop over to my form builder account, let's see if I have this open. You'll notice that a lot of these forms will start the same and then they'll have P at the end. The P is saying that this is a parent form, so that's that top level. If you see C or S, that's a subform. And a subform, if you're not sure what that is, we're going to talk about in just a minute. But essentially what you have to keep in mind with a subform, it's its own form that you're able to attach to a parent form. So having those naming conventions is really, really valuable with the organization of that form builder homepage. But another piece of that is it's valuable for when you're assigning records and you're viewing any of the data, because you're going to view the table name at that point. So when you want to add this naming convention to your form, that's done in the Edit Form Properties section when you are first starting your form out. So by default, this little tick box will already be ticked off. And what that's saying is that anything that you type in for form label will automatically be set up for the table name. But we want to uncheck that when we are using our naming convention, because we want to add _P if it is the parent form, or _C if it's the child form or subform. So that's our first best practice tip that I have for you. The next one that's really valuable and important to remember when you're building your form is that you always want to build for the device type. Now, more and more we're seeing that our customers are using both Android devices and iOS devices, but if that is the case, then make sure that you've tested your form on both different devices. If you are using just an iOS device, make sure you test on an iOS device. Just the Android, then test on the Android device. The reason being is that these are different softwares, and because of that, there are little differences that you'll see within iForm. Not major ones, but you'll want to make sure that your form is functioning the way that you want it to on the device that your user is going to have access to. So besides building for the device type, it's also important to build for the smallest device. This is especially important if you're using the select option list on an iOS or Apple device. The select option list is where you see these buttons on the form. Now, what happens if if you're using a smaller device and you haven't tested it on that smallest device, if you have a lot of text in those options, then it's actually going to cut off that text, and the user won't be able to see really get the big picture of what that option is. So that's where you always have to build for the smallest device and test for the smallest device. For those of you who are Android device users, you actually don't need to worry as much about that because it will wrap the text around. That being said, if you have a longer term and it's wrapping the text, it still could be tough for the user to read and may not be very legible again. So our next form building best practice is to add subforms to your form, not only because it allows you to create a better user experience by splitting up topics into different subforms, but also it actually impacts the upload and download speed of the data. So if you were to have, let's say, 100 different questions on one form, that I'm not sure at the exact rate that would take for upload and download, but I do know that that would take longer than if you had a parent form that maybe had 10 different subforms and each one of those subforms had 10 different questions. So that would be a much faster upload and download speed than if all those questions were on the parent form. Another reason that subforms can be really helpful is because subforms allow the users to capture one-to-many records of that subform and have it still attached to the parent form. And so that way, maybe you have an individual who's going on site and inspecting an area. Maybe you wanted to see how much land you had to clear to develop a new house. So the first thing on the parent form, you would have the user maybe capturing that the locational information and their name and today's date. Then in the subform, you're able to have them go to different areas of that land, maybe capture more locational information for those areas and count trees, whatever it may be, but they can do that as many times as they need to for that one day in that one area and have it all connected to the parent form. So it's really valuable that way. Another reason that subforms work out very well is because, or if you use a subform for photos. So a lot of times people will add our image widget, which allows the user to take pictures. They'll add, maybe 10 of those fields to a form. And that allows the user to take 10 pictures. Well, what if the user wants to take an 11th picture or a 12th picture? If you haven't set that up for them on that by adding all those image widgets, then they wouldn't be able to. So instead, what you're able to do is you're able to create a form that's used as a subform that just has the image widget in that form, and you only have that listed once. The user will then open that subform record, take a picture, and it'll bring them back to the parent form, and then they can open that subform record again and take another picture and take as many pictures as they need until they have completed it. So that's a really great way to use subforms as well. Some other best practices that we have with form building is to always make sure that you have at least one device handy while you're building forms. Now I say have at least one because if your users are going to be on both Android and iOS devices, then you'll want to make sure that you have one of each around so that you can test your forms and make sure everything's working accurately. Another best practice is to open multiple browser windows for convenience. Now that's not just a convenience factor. You'll notice I have at least 3 windows open right now. Besides it being easier to have those multiple browser windows open, once you start using iFormBuilder and you start to go a little deeper in your configurations, and maybe you're using our smart table search, then you're going to have to copy the table name from one form and then copy it over to another form. So having the 2 browser windows open at the same time really eliminates your human error and makes it easier for copying and pasting, because it does take some time to do that. So that's another best practice that we have. Another one this one's more of a preference for me, is that I don't add the required fields to a form until I've completed that form in its entirety. The reason that I do that is because I want to make sure that I can go through and test my form, test different sections of it, and sync that dummy data to the cloud while I'm in the testing environment. If I have added all the fields as required, then every time I want to test and view that dummy data, I'm going to have to submit each one of those required fields. So that's why I usually add that at the very end. Another note here, and isn't necessarily a best practice, but is more of a reminder that when you are a form builder, every form that you personally create is always going to be assigned to your username. So a lot of times, once we are done testing, we may not want to see the subform on our device. And that's where you'd have to go back and unassign that form. And I'm going to walk you through that process just to make sure that you are aware of that. So in that workflow, I've created all these forms and I have all these subforms that have been assigned to my username, and I don't want to see them on my device anymore. So all I do is I go under Forms, Form Assignment, and select one of those forms, click Assign, and then uncheck my username, and that's it. So at that point, I have unassigned that form. So it's pretty easy. It's just more of a reminder. The next point here, we kind of talked about briefly, but to limit the amount of elements on your parent form. And that's where we were talking about using the subforms along with those parent forms, because of the amount of time it'll take to sync your data. If you do have, let's say, 200 questions on your parent form, your top level form, it'll take much longer than if you split that data into subforms. The last one that I have here is to follow our Form Builder golden rules, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. So going into our Form Builder golden rules, we have 3 listed here, and one thing I am going to note is a little bit later during the session, I'm going to talk about a golden rule with our option list as well. But these are the 3 major ones that we have. The first one is to always test your form before going live, so before deploying it to your users. Of course, you can imagine why we would say that. It's really primarily the main thing is we would hate for you to have to go and assign your users or assign the form to your users without testing it, just to find out that something's not working accurately or the user isn't able to complete a field. There are so many things that could happen, so we want to make, especially when you're using the smart controls and the JavaScript, so we just want to make sure you've tested everything before you've started to deploy that to your users. The next form building golden rule is to make sure that you use unique data column names that are database friendly. Now, I have a link here that I'm going to send to you, and I'll even put it in the chat for you to look at right now. If you're unfamiliar with form building, and this is really your first time being exposed to form building, then we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we build our form. But essentially, when I say you're a unique data column name, every time you add a new field to your form. So I'll just add one down here. You'll have a section that says label and data column name. And this data column name section is what needs to be unique. If it's not unique, then you won't be able to save your form, and you'll actually need to refresh your whole browser window again and relaunch your form and then make the change so that the data column name is unique. One example, and actually the screenshot that I have listed over here, but if I want my label as location, that is perfectly fine. But the data column name cannot be location because that is a term that's not database friendly. So what I could do for this instead is I would have GPS underscore location, and that would make this data column name friendly for the database. The next best practice that we have here, or I guess form building golden rule, is extremely important to remember. And if you don't remember anything today, hopefully you at least remember this. And it's do not change the input type, the data size, or the encryption of an element on a live form because it will delete the data. And that's so, so important. And I'll say it again. Just make sure you do not delete the input type, the data size, or the encryption of an element on a live form because it will delete the data. So if something were to come up, and let's say this form that I have in front of me now, I had submitted to my users, I've collected over 100 different records, but then I realized, okay, this location field, I had put this in as a text field, but what I really want to do is I want to use the location input type. So instead of changing this field, which I've already collected data on, what I do instead is I can duplicate the input underneath. So you'll see I've duplicated location. It says location 1. I go back to the original field, and in the input properties, there's a button that says disabled. So I'm going to disable that field altogether. And now I can make the change to the duplicate that I've added. And I'm just going to change the label so it can still say location. I can now go into the input properties, select the location widget, and there I've completed changing that input and having it so that I don't lose any data that was previously collected. If I did change the input type of that original field, then any data that was previously collected would not be viewable any longer. There are some other initial project considerations. First and foremost, what devices will the end users have access to? So what is it? Are they going to be use Android, iOS, or Android and iOS? Because as we've talked about, that will impact your form structure. The next is the naming conventions. Decide on a naming convention that you're going to use and share that with your team so that everybody can identify quickly and name correctly, so that there's a format set up. Another initial project consideration is how do you structure the form? Where can you break the information into different subforms to make it a little bit more consumable for the user? But also, what information do you need captured on the parent form so that it's always connected to all those different subforms that you later on add? What element input types do you use for each question? So with the over 40 different types of input types, how do you guarantee that you're capturing the best data from your users? And the last one that I have here is where can I add form functionality? And that's using the iFormBuilder smart controls so that you can cut down on human error and human input. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the smart controls that we have available to you, we do have another webinar coming up in the next month, and that will go through how to use the smart controls. Or feel free to listen to some of our past recordings. Another tip here is to use our reference IDs, specifically the reference ID 5, so that you can change the color of a form in the surrounding area of that form so that the user can quickly identify it on their device. So right now, most of you can see my device. I'm using a great tool called Reflector. What I'm going to start with is I'm going to go through the different iFormBuilder input types that we have available to you. And this is this is a form I will share with you, but this is just so that you are aware of them and so that you can see all the different options that are available and how to collect data better using these. So the first thing you'll notice is that when I tapped this form, it immediately opened a map. And this is because I added the Esri widget to my form. This only works this way if you have connection. So I want to point that out. All I do with the Esri widget though is I tap that plus button. You see those little crosshairs, and then I can select an area. And I think I'll just be in the ocean today, but I'll select a point where I want to capture that locational information for the Esri widget. And that information is then brought down here. So if I had connected it to my Esri account, I could also bring in an object ID and global ID if I've connected with the Esri collector app. But let's start at the top. So the first one here is the attachment widget, and you can attach an MOV file, a PDF, a JPEG, and these are then stored locally on your device so that the user can have them even if they're in the offline environment. So I've just tapped that field and I have attached my a PDF, and so this is the PDF from another training session that we had. The Assign To widget allows you to assign a record to yourself or to another user. So maybe for this, this is a kind of a bad example because I'm the only user in this account, but let's say I've completed part of this form and my supervisor wants to see what I've completed today. So I would assign this to myself and I'd sync it to the cloud. My supervisor would be able to see the fields that I completed, but I'd assign the record back down to my device so that the next day I can just pick up where I left off the day before.
Hey Berit, going back to the Esri widget. With the Esri widget, does that capture the current location similar to Google Maps or something along those lines?
So with the Esri widget, what you're actually able to do is you're basically able to do a drop point. So you're able to select any part, anywhere in the world and get it in between those crosshairs, and that is where you're capturing or you're putting your point, dropping your point there. What some people will do is they use both the Esri widget and the location information to see if there's any correspondence for their location at that point. And let me know if there's any follow-up questions for that too, MJ.
Okay, we'll do.
Thank you very much. The next field that we're going to talk about here is the counter widget. And this is so great, and it's something that we've actually came out in the past 6 months. And it allows you to just tap the plus button or the minus button as you go through. By default, it'll always go by 1, but if you want to edit this and change what the increment is, that's done through the reference IDs and what we call the element reference ID. So when you're in your form builder, if you go to where it says reference ID and where it's reference ID 1, by putting counter underscore step value equals 2, then at that point, instead of going up by 1, it would go up by 2. Beneath that, we have the date and the date time. Very simple. It'll just show up today's date, and I can select that, and it's just it's a Rolodex essentially. What I want to point out is, this is great for the user selecting days that are recent, but what I recommend is actually if you're trying to have someone put in their birth date, instead of having them scroll through here and then accidentally press outside the box and then have to go back in and go through that process again, we do have some other widgets. One specifically I suggest that has a mask, and that's the one I would usually use is the Social Security number widget, and you can change that mask to have it formatted the way that you want for the user's birth date, instead of having the user go through this process and, like I mentioned, accidentally getting outside of the wheel. And when we go into some of these masking widgets, I'll show you how that looks. The date and time looks very, very similar. It just says today and then the time. The drawing widget is one that I absolutely love, and this unfortunately is only for iOS devices right now. But what you're able to do is you're able to add in a picture. So I'll just take a basic picture of the office right now, and I can use that photo and I can use it as a background image. Then I can take another picture and I'll zoom in a little bit more. Maybe I have a problem with my doorknob, so I'll select the doorknob and I'll use that photo as a floating image. So I'll resize that. I can move it over to the side, and then I can even draw on it. Let's say I'll go like that. And I can say trouble area, or I can type in trouble. And you can add so many different options here as far as the annotation. And you can see just by holding down to that, I can merge to the drawing, merge to the background. So there's a lot you can do with the annotation, and very, very nice. And you can add so many different pictures to that. The next is the email widget. So this allows you to actually have a user put in their email address. You can assign a domain to it. So then all they would have to type in is the beginning part, and then at iFormBuilder.com would already be set up there. What I've done here, and let me just scroll down to my email widget, is in the input properties. Once you've selected email, you have the option to send email. So this way, whoever puts in their email address will receive the HTML version of the record that's captured here today. The Esri widget we already spoke about. Now, what I want to mention about the Esri widget, though, is because you must have Wi-Fi or cellular connection, if you're using a form and you've connected your form to your Esri account, to have that ability to connect to your Esri account, you actually need to have the Esri widget in your form. But if your user is not going to have service, then you can actually disable that field, and that'll keep your connection to your ArcGIS Online account, but it'll not launch the Esri widget, so they'll still be able to collect data even when they don't have Wi-Fi connection. The next field that we have here is just the image. This is where you're able to allow the user to take a picture. Now, for those of you who are new to iFormBuilder and those of you who've been around, I have some good information from you, and I just learned about this today. And just pay attention the next couple months, or actually the next month or two, because we are going to have an element reference ID for the image widget as well as for the drawing widget. And what that reference ID will do is that will either force the user to take a picture from their photo library, or force them to manually take a picture right then and there. So they wouldn't be able to use the library, or they would be forced to use it essentially. That will be really valuable for those of you who want to make sure that the user is taking a picture in real time. So it's going to be really exciting, and that's just a little sneak peek to something that's up and coming within iFormBuilder. Okay, just took my picture again, and I'll use that. And that's a very blurry picture, but you get the idea, hopefully. Then I have a label, and the label is just as it sounds. You're able to add some text, and it's great for directions. But another thing that I want to point out is if you are going to use the label input type, this is another time you'd want to use our element reference ID. if you wanted that label to then be in your HTML report or in your PDF report. If you did want it in there, then you type in element, all caps, just element underscore report. And that would then put the label in your PDF and HTML report. Just move this back over here. There is another field that you actually don't see here because unfortunately I didn't add a graphic, but this is if you wanted to add your own logo to a form, or if you had a diagram that you want the user to see, you can use the image label to bring that photo in, and the data column name will just need to match that picture name that you want included in there. And if you are looking on how to add more images to your forms, I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. As we go through here, the next field that we have is the location widget, and that always needs to be tapped by the user, and they just hit refresh to get the most up-to-date information. We can then tap to scan for our Manatee Works widget. So I have my little barcode here. And all I did underneath the Manatee Works widget is I passed that raw data into a text area so that I can view it and then parse it out if I want to. The next field is our multi-select option list. So let's go into this first option list. So we have 3 different option lists that we're going to talk about. The first one is the multi-select. But every time you add a new option list to your form, then you'll go into the input properties, you'll select either multi-select, pick list, or select for your option list type. You'll go into your option list and option list manager, and this is where you'll create your list of options that you want added to that option list. These option lists are available in your profile, so if you want to reuse them in other forms, that's very, very easy to do. And for the rest of this form, I mean, we go through using our range widget and using read only, as well as some of these other fields. But what I'd like to do is I'm actually going to send this over to you, like I mentioned, in a form package. So you'll be able to play around with these different input types, and we can continue on with the form building journey for today's webinar. MJ, are there any questions?
No, Berit, we're doing okay.
All right, wonderful. So let's go ahead. I'm going to quit showing my device, and let's go ahead and create a new form. So the first process here is you go under Forms and go into Form Builder, then go into Create New Form. What I've done for you is I've actually broken down what each section is for this Edit Form Properties page. But just very briefly, as we go through it, let's create a new form. And for the form label, let's call it October 101 webinar. And again, we need to use best practices here for our table name. So I unchecked where it says based on label, and I'm going to place an _P. Where we have description, this is something I forgot to mention to you earlier, but when you look on your Form Builder homepage and you look at a specific form, there's a little eye in the right-hand corner, and if you tap that eye, it's going to show you, the user, the description of the form, and that's what you create here. So I'll just say, this is a demo form. Underneath that, these are the form icons that you would see in that form, your iForm homepage for each form. Feel free to use the icons that we have included here, but you can also take a public image, and add that to your form icon as well. So I'll go ahead and go for iFormBuilder and see what image that we can get. All right, I'll just take our little icon here. You do have to keep in mind the size of these images, because if they are too heavy, for instance, the other day I tried to use an image that was, I think, like 1,000 by 800 pixels, which worked fine on the iOS devices, but not on the Android device. So if you are an Android user, please keep in mind the size of the form icons that you're going to use, because that can make your app crash. So I've added my photo URL here. Underneath the form icon URL section, I have our reference IDs. Now these can be so powerful and really can change the way that your form is viewed because of reference ID 5. That's where I was able to add that border and that new color to the specific form, but also you're able to define what's being viewed in the table view if you're looking at data, and that's through reference ID 2. And reference ID 4 is the way to override a device setting as well. So this really changes how your form's working. Like I mentioned to you earlier, if you are wanting to add images to your forms, you can connect your Dropbox account, or if you have a public folder, then you'd want to place that folder here, that folder path essentially. So I have a Dropbox account and I've configured this, and I've connected my Dropbox account under company info. And I just want to mention that because this is where, if I go to my edit media configurations, I see that my Dropbox is connected, and so I'm just basically creating that folder path here, so the images that I have in my Dropbox account in these folders can then be called into this form.
Hey, Berit.
Sure.
Just had a question come in. Is there a recommended pixel size for the icons?
For the icons, I would say don't go bigger, or if you can try to stay smaller than 100 by 100. That's just what I've learned. I don't know where that limit is, where you get it to be too large, and I'd be happy to look into that a little bit more and get back to that individual.
Okay, thanks, Berit.
Sure. So I'm going to save my changes. And now this is the regular Form Builder GUI. To start, if I add a new input, this is where it'll always start out as a text field. Underneath that, the label, again, this is what my user is going to see. So I'm going to call this, we'll just call it inventory number. And the description, I can add a description here for the fields, and a lot of times these descriptions are viewable by the user, and so this can almost assist them as they are completing their form. One thing I want to note about these descriptions is not every input type will the user be able to see the description. It's only when it opens up an additional window almost will they be able to see the description. So I'm going to say place inventory number here. And this is as a text input type right now, but I can easily go and change this to a number inventory if need be. Say that this inventory number is a set mask. So maybe it's always going to start with INV. I can use one of our masking widgets. We'll use our social security number 1. And what I'll place in here is I can say INV dash, and maybe I want it so that it has to be 3 numbers. Now you can also customize it so it has the option for alpha characters as well, but right now I'm just going to keep it as numbers. Also, as you can see in the input properties, I can change the keyboard. By default, the social security number is already going to go to a number keyboard, but I can just select that as well, just in case. Save my form, and then I'll go ahead and add a new input. Let's say we've selected the inventory number, and now we need to choose a specific item. So I'll say select an item. And this is where I definitely want to use an option list. If I only want them to select one item, then I want to use my pick list. If I wanted them to select multiple, then that's when I'd use MultiSelect. If I had short and brief text here, then I could potentially use the select option list. But because I know that I'm going to have more, then I want to use the pick list instead. So I go ahead and I select the input type for pick list. I then go into my option list manager, and I need to create a new option list. So I press the plus button. Once you press the plus button, at the very top, you'll see the pound sign and my option list. And I want to change that. I'm going to call this item selection. And let's just keep this as like TVs, VCR, since everyone still has a VCR, DVD, CD player. We'll go, for those of you who are a little older here, you'll appreciate this. We'll have a record player, and we'll have a Discman, and why not a Walkman as well? Okay,
Hey,
so we,
Berit,
yep.
younger folks know what that is. And I also had a question coming. With the number input, is there a possible way to have this randomly generated? An example, if you're doing a quote and want the number to be unique every time.
So we have another field called unique ID. And unique ID is great for something like that. And what it's going to do is you're able to actually create and structure what goes in front of that unique ID. But then the last part is going to be the record ID that is being captured. And that record ID is created once the record hits the server. So if you just bear with me 1 second, I'll show you how to do that too.
And Berit, going off the option list you're on, good question here. Do you have any preset option lists available for download, such as states for the United States?
So we're currently in the process of creating a library where you can get those downloads. I may personally have one, and if I do, I'll take a look, and I can add it to the form package that I'm going to make available for all of you. But right now, unfortunately, there's no way to go in and select a specific type of option list that we've already generated, but coming soon.
Berit, this may be diving in the weeds a little bit here, but would it be possible to upload these option lists by a CSV file at this time?
At this time, no. The only way to put in options in your option list is to manually do it like I'm doing it right now, but also through the iFormBuilder API. And if you're unfamiliar with what the API is a developer tool to automate your workflow. So for instance, if you have an option list created in one database and you'd like it also created in iFormBuilder, then you're able to use our API to connect the two services so that the option list can be created that way.
Okay, Berit, that's all the questions for now. Thank you.
Sure. So now that I've created my option list, I first need to save my list. And once I've saved my list, I'm just going to select it and let's see. And hopefully, I meant to select it. I do not see it listed here. Oh, that's because I wasn't going further enough. All right, so item selection. After I've selected my option list, I then assign the list to the element. Make sure that you see your options listed here. If you don't, that means that they actually weren't assigned, and when you try to save your form, you could run into some problems at that point. All right, for that person who is wondering about creating that unique ID, all you do is add a new input. Again, I'll call this unique ID. And if I go into my input properties, we have something called unique ID. And this is where you can add your own prefix. So I can keep that as inventory because that kind of goes along with the flow that I have here. And once this record, or every time a record hits the server, it's going to add the record ID to this unique ID field. So this unique ID will not, the ID won't be shown to the user. It's really for the data side of things. And so instead of the user seeing a section that says unique ID, what you can actually do is you go into your smart controls and in the condition values and place false to hide that field from the user's view, but still see it, that unique ID in your data. MJ, any questions? Or are we still doing good?
Looks like we're still doing good, Berit.
All right. So here's just in the PDF I'm going to share with you. I just wanted to mention that I have broken down the different sections of the form builder. So the common, input properties, option list, smart paging, smart control, smart table search, reference ID, and the info section. I've broken it down for you to actually click on those links to learn some more information if you're looking for that, and if there's things that you're not ready to learn today, but you are interested in learning about it down the road. But as we go on with this form, I'm going to add a new input, and this is how I'm actually going to attach a subform here. So the first thing I want to do is add a label, and I'll just call this one photos. Then I'll go in my input properties, I'll select subform, and the next thing I need to do is go into smart paging. For this example, I've already created a photo subform, and so I can easily just attach that here. But if you haven't created the subform by the time that you're building out your parent form, then what I suggest for you to do is just keep it as a text field until you've created that subform. And once you have, then come back in here. You may need to refresh the whole window, but then come back in here and then you'll see the list of the forms in your account at that point. Now, because I want my user to take multiple pictures, I'm going to change the link mode to multiple. If I didn't do that, then the user would only be allowed to take one picture. The next little tip here that I'm going to give you, and this is going a little bit more advanced, but we have this awesome reference ID, element reference ID for photos, and it's subform underscore batch underscore mode. And what that allows the user to do is, instead of the user having to go back into this parent form to create a new subform record, every time they complete a subform record, it'll automatically open up a blank subform record for them to fill out. And once they've completed filling out all those records, all they have to do is press the back button, and that'll return them to their parent form. So I know we're getting a little advanced here using our reference IDs, but I wanted to mention that because it is really powerful when you're thinking about how to make your form function the way that you want it to. So here's a list of the different input types that we have. The next thing I have here is just the the three different types of option lists that are available. And we used the pick list earlier. And again, here's how the select would look with those actual buttons on the form. Now, after that, I have our option list ins and outs. So if you're ever going to edit a live option list, here are some best practices or the golden rules for editing live option lists. The first one is to always add a new, every time you want to add a new option, always add it to the bottom. Instead of removing an option if you no longer want it, place false in the condition value to hide it from the user's view, but do not delete it, because by deleting that option, you're actually going to change how the index values are displaying, the order of the index values and the key values, which in turn could then lose your data. So it's important to keep in mind, if you do have to edit a live list, that instead of deleting it, just place false in the condition value. Here are the steps we went through with the subforms. Here are the reference IDs that we've talked about as well. This is just a breakdown on adding those images and icons to your forms, and I have links if you're wanting to add images to your option list or just icons or image labels to your form as well. All right, Here's some additional links on how to make your form even more powerful. And I know we're going a little late here, but I want to make sure I cover some of the iFormBuilder new releases as well. First thing is our form package, which includes a package builder and package import. So like I keep saying on today's call, I'm going to send you or make available a form package that you can then use our package import to bring into your own form builder account. To learn more on how to do that, I have a link provided. The next is if you're worried about your data, or if you're manipulating and cleaning your data, doing a data cleanse a lot, then you're going to love the stored filters, because this allows you to create a filter and store it for all the relevant data of your form, and then you can go back and use that filter at any time. You can also add rules and groups, which can be really powerful. So a lot of times when you had to edit your iFormBuilder data, you'd have to go into each individual record and then edit it one at a time. This way, we have our table edit view, which allows you to go in and view your filtered data and make changes to that filtered data really easily. So it's a great new asset. We have a new version of our API. And so for those of you who are in the developer, you know a developer, if they're going to be working with iFormBuilder, please make sure that they're aware of our newest version. And here are our links for just what we talked about in the beginning for our different support options. All right, MJ, are there any questions?
Let me just double check here. Will anyone be doing any API tutorials or know of a location where we can get info on those?
So we have a large amount of API documentation in our help desk. And if I just jump over there, if you click on the help desk button, if you scroll down, you'll be able to see for the API we have our API authentication, so the common details, API code samples, as well as API documentation. So I'd urge you to take a look at the three of those. And we also have past webinars where we talk about integrating data. The last one that we had my colleague Ben Ray come in and give a demo of using the most current API, so API 6.0. Any other questions?
Berit, it doesn't look like there's any other questions. Just going back on something that was said earlier in the webinar, I really want to stress this to everyone that's on here. The voting for features tab. A lot of our great features that people really love came from ideas from current customers. So when someone, if you're talking to myself, Berit, anyone on the help desk, when we tell you to go vote for these features, please take that seriously. That's how we can make the product better and adjust to your needs as well. But other than that, Berit, now there is no more questions.
All right, well, I just want to send a big thank you for all of you for attending today's session. I will, like I mentioned, create a form package as well as send you guys emails in the next 24 hours with a link to the recording and a link to the PDF and the form packages. If you ever need anything, please go chat with our iFormBuilder agents or feel free to reach out to either MJ or myself.
Berit just had one final question slide in here.
Sure.
Going back to the location and the Esri and the Esri going off, is there a way to capture the device locally?
Can you repeat that?
And going back to the location and the Esri going off, is there a way to capture the device locally?
So I'm not sure if I'm answering this question correctly. So whoever is asking this, please, let me know after. But when you look at the iFormBuilder data and you look at one of our feeds, you're going to see the metadata. And within that metadata, you're going to see created location and modified location. Created location is where the user first started filling out that form, and modified location is the last location where they were completing that form, whether it's on the server or if it's on their device. So that information is being captured through the device. Now, to get the locational information the way that I assume you're talking about is you have to use the location widget. Hopefully that answers the question. So let me know if it doesn't. And for that individual who is asking that question, I would strongly suggest that you go back to our special topic webinar link. We have a Best of Both Worlds, iFormBuilder and Esri integrations webinar that we've recorded. And I think that would be really helpful for helping you understand how that integration works.
Berit, looks like you hit the nail on the head with the answer there.
All right, thank you. If there isn't anything else, thank you again, MJ, for hosting, and everyone else for taking time out of your busy schedule.